Welcome. I'm Sarah Cates, and I'm here today to kind of turn the tables on Selena's podcast. She's given me an opportunity to interview her and let us hear her side of the story today. So I'm anxious and nervous and all excited at the same time.
I'm glad to have you here. And it's odd to sit in this side of the podcast because normally I'm the one with the questions and ready to go to interview somebody. But I am so honored to sit in this seat and let you talk to me today and have you here in running the show.
I'm excited to be here. This is a great opportunity. Selena, you're an amazing woman. She is the mother behind the Phoenix Project. The Phoenix Network.
The Phoenix Network, yeah.
The Phoenix Network. She has taken time to do this podcast to get people's stories out that don't normally get to tell their stories.
Yeah.
And today we get to hear her. So
yeah,
I'm anxious to get started. I know
Okay.
you have quite a story.
Yeah, and as we tell his story, I think what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit and give just the basic foundation, because I think where I want to pick up at is towards the end where everything, finally kind of the wheels fell off the wagon, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you want to tell us?
Yeah. So my son was 37 years of age, and for 22, I struggle with saying how many years, but for about 22 years, he struggled with an opiate addiction. And it wasn't always opiate. I think it started off with methamphetamine, but Stephen went through the juvenile court system and then ended up pipelining straight into prison and then rotating in and out of prison. And every time he came out, it was the drug addiction that constantly got him back in trouble and put him back in prison. And then in 2000, I think maybe around 2016, he was finally diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder, but he also had some diagnoses as a teenager. He went in and out of some juvenile mental health facilities. And I wasn't ready to admit that he was mentally ill even as a teenager. I just thought he was just a difficult teenager. Later found out in his 20s and 30s, no, we were dealing with full-on mental illness. And so once he was diagnosed about 2016 in the Department of Corrections, he then became medicated through them. And I can't say that the Department of Corrections is really properly medicating people.
Sure.
It's barbaric, some of the stuff that is being, just the lack of medication, proper medication and follow-through care, mental health, talk therapy. It's just not done. What's being done out here in the streets is not being done in prisons. So when he came home from prison in 2019, it was really important to get him into therapy services, ongoing mental health help, and we did that. We engaged in mental health services in towards the Kansas City area. Of course, they were not private. They were all going to be community mental health because he was lack of insurance, straight out of prison. So you're working with community mental health in that environment. And he did take medications, and he was working on drug addiction as well. Stephen was compliant with medication. Most generally, he stayed compliant. If he wasn't self-medicating with drugs, he was staying compliant with his medication. But you get him out on a lick and he'd be gone for a week or two. He was off meds. And then once he was off meds, it was a full-on, he had to run the course, crash and burn, and start all over again. You couldn't just meet him up, get him his meds, and he could get back on track. He had to run it to the end and start over. And then in 2021, Stephen was extradited back to Seattle, Washington, or Tacoma, Washington area on an old probation violation. And while he was out there, really very quickly after he got out there, he was shot and paralyzed. And that's when his life changed. He was no longer controlling his life. His bravado of a tough guy running the streets, running amok. I mean, he was a mess because of his drug addiction, but now that he was disabled, severely disabled, there was no running the streets anymore.
Sure.
And I think my son at that point felt that he was cheated his death because he didn't want to live like that.
Absolutely.
And I think he struggled with that mentally, of course. And I think we didn't know what to do. As a family, we were so used to Stephen, we were afraid we were going to bury him. And now here we are with him disabled.
Uh-huh.
And the whole shift of our family changed because now he required all of us to be caretakers to some degree. So I brought him back home to Kansas City, or back to our home here. And we had a year and a half in our home. And then he transitioned out to start living independently. And I had guardianship on Stephen. And while he was living independently, he was still doing pretty well because I very much had my hands in who was around him, what was going on, how his services were being done. Because
You were being a mama.
I was being a mom. I was making those phone calls, making sure those people were showing up.
Absolutely.
And at some point, somebody had been bringing drugs into him. So he relapsed. And we seen that shift happen very quickly. And immediately he started fighting for guardianship to be removed.
For sure.
And we could have fought. It was very expensive. And we did fight. We did do our best to try to maintain that guardianship. But he reached out and got services that with a court order, he had a guardian at Lytton that helped him achieve his own guardianship returned back to him. And we didn't fight that very hard because it was destroying our family. So I would rather be his mom and be in his life than be a mother that was estranged from him.
That makes sense.
I didn't want to lose my son. If I have to lose the guardianship but keep my son, then that was a tough decision, but that's what I did. But once the guardianship was lifted, I no longer could make the phone calls. I could no longer get the information.
Absolutely.
The services wouldn't talk to me. They weren't legally obligated to talk to me, and HIPAA played in. And Stephen began the downward spiral of his life after the guardianship ended. And the people that were coming into his home pretending to be friends were people that were taking advantage of him and using him for a flop house, a place to stay, eat his, food stamp groceries, and shower in his shower. In return, Stephen had an income, and the drugs could be purchased with that income, and they could administer the drugs. And so it was a deadly arrangement between everybody, and I had no control of it because I couldn't make my way into that house and run that situation off. And I think Stephen got in over his head. I think he realized and he would hate me saying this because we fought over this. He was very fragile. Medically, he was fragile. But I think he realized, as fragile as he was, and the amped up drug use, that he was in a really bad place.
Okay.
I think he recognized that because even in the midst of being angry at me, there was a lot of anger because I didn't care about a guardianship. I was still going over there.
Absolutely.
I was still knocking on the door, making people uncomfortable, running harmful people out of there. But he would still call me, Mom, I can't get anybody to come over here and help me today. Can you bring me something to eat? Can you, he got to where he didn't let me do any of his hygiene care. There was, he wanted his dignity, so he didn't let me do that. But he was at the point where he would be angry at me and yell and scream at me, but then 30 minutes later, he would call me and ask for help. And listen, I had a mom that her and I was the same way, and I was able-bodied. We would have an argument. I'd get mad at her, hang up. 2 hours later, I'd call her, can you tell me the recipe to blah, 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 blah? So that might have been our family dysfunction, but it wasn't dysfunctional to me because that's how we were. I was always
Right.
going to be mom. I was the target of most of his anger, but I still showed up. Even if I had to walk on eggshells, I was never going to not show up. If I had to go in there and make everybody uncomfortable, I was going to show up.
So you've given us a lot of information there. You touched on some things I'd kind of like to go back
Yeah,
to.
go back to it.
Previous to Stephen's injury, you could see that addiction was an issue in combination with the mental health.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the Department of Corrections and the different services that he'd been in and out of. Do you feel like there was anything that ever helped, or?
I mean, yeah, ultimately, the one thing I will say about Stephen is I will not ever take away what his accountability needed to be. Stephen made the choices to get help, and he also made the choices to stop getting help. So, with that being said, he was engaging in talk therapy when, when he would go in and do an assessment and they would
Sure.
schedule that. He did that quite a bit at different times. And medication, he did want to take his medication.
Okay.
Because there were a lot of times, even when he was strung out on the streets, he would call me and ask me, can I go pick it up and bring it to him? So off I went, So I know that Stephen wanted to comply in medication, and those things did help him. And yeah, we did engage in community mental health multiple times throughout from 2019 when he was released from prison until he died.
So do you think 2019 was a pivotal moment where the addiction and the treatment, Stephen was in a place to recognize that was something he needed to address?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he would run amok, crash, and then try to regroup, and he knew he had to engage in those services.
Sure.
And he would.
Sure.
I didn't really have to fight with him to go engage in those services. I wasn't dragging him to those services.
When you get to that level of desperation, you're willing to do whatever it takes to kind of turn the page,
Yeah.
even though it's very hard.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a couple of times he would detox right here on this floor. And day 3 or 4, when he's really deep in it, he would say, I got a couple more days of this, and then I need to go to seek some treatments. And
how is that for a mom to watch your son detox?
Well, in all honesty, I didn't know really anything about detox. I didn't have that history. I never seen my son detox until this last, time he got out of prison. And it's kind of funny because, not funny, but sad. I was afraid to call and tell anybody because of shame and embarrassment that comes with it. I didn't know who to ask help for or who to ask the help to come from. I didn't know where you called to get this kind of services. And I would call a rehab and they would say, oh, well, he can't come here until he's done detoxing. And they would tell me, well, no, he shouldn't be detoxing in your home. You need to take him. Well, I couldn't get him off the floor. There was no way he was leaving at that point when he was that deep into detox.
In 2019, I can say just from my own lived experience, is kind of when fentanyl came into the picture and changed things. It changed the dynamic of treatment, the way that detox happened, not just for the person, but for the people providing the services to try to ease that. And as a mom watching, that's got to be really hard to see your son falling apart.
Yeah. I mean, he was very, angry during detox part of it because he's miserable. And I can recognize that now because I'm more educated about what that is.
Sure.
But in those moments, I would literally sit in the floor with him. I literally held him and put his head in my lap and washed his face while he was sweating and brought him, Gatorade. And he would cry and he would say, I hate this. I hate that you're seeing me do this. And then 10 minutes later, get out of here. I don't want you in here, And those were those were moments that I was lost in, what do I do?
And no support.
No support.
No support for your side,
Mm.
as a mom that's trying to figure this out, navigate, something that is completely foreign
Yeah.
and a system that's not helping and that fear that comes along with that,
Yeah.
all wrapped up into one.
I reached out to a family friend, and she worked in, well, I think she worked in she was working in social services at the time, but she had a lot of contacts, and she would say, yeah, you got to get him to detox, and I couldn't get him. I mean, he was too far into it at that point, and she would, a lot of people back then, there was a very much opinion of tough love.
Absolutely.
There was not this, kinder, gentler management of treatment. It was, well, when he's ready, he'll go.
Sure.
He's going to be sick on your floor for a few days. Don't be surprised if he gets up and leaves and you have to do this all over again.
That's a fact.
And I was told that by a lot of people, but I couldn't get anybody to come and talk to him. Nobody wanted to come. I said, I can't get him to you. How am I supposed to get him to services if I can't get him to you? So there was a lot of learning curve in those early days. And I learned by trial and error later on, when he was starting to crash before he would go into detox, I would try to get him to Truman Medical Center.
Sure.
I was trying to walk him in to the point that I had a, what do you call it? An affidavit.
Uh-huh.
I had to file an affidavit a couple of times for them to do, 96-hour hold on him just to get him in the door.
Well, what you just touched on is the disease of addiction, right there, that the constant cycle of wanting to be better, going through the detox only to go back out again. As a mom, you're trying to fight this from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I didn't have, there's times now that I'm so angry that I didn't have this knowledge, because it would have been completely different how we managed his treatment. Because now I know we're going to do this a bunch before it works. Back then, I kept thinking, I was so angry. Why? Why do we have to keep doing this? This is where you need to go. Why am I coming to get you, from this neighborhood again? Why do you keep going back? I didn't have the capability of understanding it because there were no services out there to teach the parents about addiction.
Sure.
That we are in it too. We're as sick as they are.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have any guidance through this.
Well, and the stigma.
The stigma stops us from reaching the people that can give us more knowledge.
For sure. The shame that a family carries in the grips of addiction. It's not just the addict that's using. It's the family that's trying to, nobody wants to go out and say, hey, my kid's at home withdrawn from fentanyl. That's not
right. I
not
can't
an
begin to
open
tell
discussion.
You how many times at work I would be in the middle of a meeting and he's blowing my phone up because he's, maybe he's out somewhere, or maybe I don't know. It's just, I compartmentalized my life with Stephen and the rest of my world.
For sure.
And I refuse to do that now. I used to be that way because I felt like I was going to be judged and stigma was going to prevent me from having a successful career or whatever. I don't care anymore. This is who I am. And this is what I lived through. This is my lived experience. And I'm not going to pretend we didn't live through this and survive it. I have publicly spoken. I have been in the media. You can't run my name through any background check and not come up with what I basically am doing now. And it'll be the rest of my life what I do.
And you telling your story, that was opening the door for so many other families that have carried the same stigma, shame.
Yeah.
And being able to do that gives purpose to Stephen's life in a different manner.
I actually feel like I'm trying to show up and be the person I needed. That's my goal, is to show up and listen, help find services, talk to moms and let them know that you absolutely are not alone. I survived this. I survived the worst case scenario. You can get through this. But the most important part of it is there's a community out there of mothers that have children that are still in the trenches. I don't want them to see my story as the worst case scenario. I want them to understand we didn't get our victory of celebration. And that left me with an open, gaping wound. And the only way I heal that wound is go and support and celebrate your victory. Go and find the people that need their cheering section and let me join in and cheer for you.
It's a dark spot when you're going through this as a family and as an addict. You feel isolated,
Yeah.
alone, that nobody's there, nobody loves you, and it's a mixed emotions. As a mom, I'm a mom. My kids are younger, so I haven't, and I hope I don't have to experience this, but I'm a child of addicts. Um, it's hard because it's like a love-hate, you're mad and angry, but you wanna love them through it. How do
Yeah.
you balance that as a mom?
I didn't do a very good job of it, and that has to be
I don't
part
think
of.
you're giving yourself enough
Oh no,
credit.
I mean in the trenches with Stephen, I did not do a very good job of it, and I have to be honest with that because if I only sit here and tell you the glorified pretty parts of the story, then there's no authenticity to my story. Because there's moms and dads that are out there making horrible mistakes and bad choices of how they're managing it, and we have to be able to be open and talk about that.
I agree.
So I was angry. I didn't want to understand. I wanted him to pull his head out of his ass and do the right thing and stop screwing up and stop embarrassing your family and stop this and stop that. And what reality was is I just added more pressure to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that. I was very much thinking about how it affects me, not how it was affecting him. I mean, I knew he had the the legal problems, and that was the cause and effect. He had the cause and effect of screwing up and making your family mad. But I didn't understand that he was so broken and so hurt that he didn't know how to deal with it any other way.
Sure.
That this was his coping mechanism. It wasn't the cause, or it wasn't the problem. It was the relieving of the effect of his problem. And I didn't have the ability to understand that at the time.
Symptom of a greater sickness.
Yes. I didn't have the ability to understand that at the time. And I've spent a lot of time taking a moment and telling him I'm sorry that I didn't understand his addiction, even though I was in it with him shoulder to shoulder. The one thing that I did do, because I think I subconsciously or instinctually knew, is that I couldn't give up on him.
Mm-hmm.
I had to always show up for him.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make sure that he knew he was not left to manage it by himself, because I had to be able to survive in the event we lost him.
Sure.
How do I survive the guilt if I disassociate from him, if I leave him by himself to, if I abandoned him?
I'm sure you've learned a lot about codependency.
Yeah.
In all of this, and how that's a very fine line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard, I'm sure, to want to show up, but love him to get him better, not to enable his continued behavior.
And I didn't have the terminology. I just kind of knew that what I needed to do, but I didn't have the terminology. And since Stephen's passed, I've met some incredible mothers, and they've taught me a lot along the way. And one of those is a pretty good friend of mine that she came up with the terminology to love them from across the street. And basically that's the boundaries. Like, I'm going to be right here, but I'm going to walk alongside you from the other side of the street.
For sure.
And it was a great analogy of what I had to do some days. Like, I love you, but I'm not going to destroy my life to prove to you I love you. And a lot of times that's what I did. There was a lot of times I let him have to sit in his mess, but I was checking up on him. And I think that is what makes me okay today, is to know that I did not alienate him. I did not give up on him, even to the point that I would make him so angry that I was showing up.
Sure.
Like, he didn't want me to show up that much. Didn't want me coming in and catching him getting high. He didn't want me doing those things.
But he did not want you to either.
Right. Right. And I would go into those environments knowing, oh man, I still get the kicked in gut feeling. I can remember pulling up at his house, turmoil in my gut, knowing that as soon as I open this door, it's going to be a fight. But can I sit out here and not go in? That's as much turmoil. There was no clear direction of what I should and shouldn't do. And I just simply did what I think was the next right thing.
That's all you can do.
And that's a terminology that I've learned since he's passed away. But that's, I think, instinctually what I was doing was, I know he's going to be mad at me, but he's going to see that I showed. And that's the only tool I had, is to show up.
Showing up counts.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Stephen had to go back to Washington to handle some legal situations. In doing so, was there services provided to Stephen in Washington? Like, what was the setup there?
So he went extradited. He went, I have to tell this part of it. He went in long underwear because he was arrested in long underwear.
And the whites, so we could take him in the jail.
And they took him by handcuff and flew him on commercial airline in white long underwear. And I think it was like October, November. No, I'm sorry, I take that back. It was September. They took him in September. And in Washington State, he was on community probation, so they didn't have to provide him with any services.
Sure.
All he had to do is show up for probation. We don't care where you live. We don't care where your services are or how you figure that out. And he wasn't a resident of that community. So in order for him to get any services, we were like, what do we do? So I had gotten him into a recovery house out there. It was a sober living house out there.
Was he clean when he went to Washington?
No.
Okay.
No, he detoxed through that process.
Okay.
And then got to this recovery program, and then relapsed in the recovery program because that recovery program was they weren't running a recovery program. They were running a scam. And he was able to come and go and do what he wanted as long as they were able to utilize his they set him up on the community programs out there. They set him up on Apple Care, which is their state Medicaid.
Sure.
And so as long as they were able to have his services being billed to them, they didn't care where he was at or what he was doing. So he was able to run amok. They were able to utilize his Social Security number to be able to benefit them. It was a horrible environment.
So no true services. No assistance from probation and whatever.
Show up every 2 weeks.
And a community doesn't know.
Correct.
Using opiates.
Yep.
Not a mix for anything productive to come out of.
Well, the state of Washington at that time decriminalized drug use.
Oh, helpful.
So drug use is happening everywhere. Openly happening on the city streets, wherever you wanted to go. So for somebody with an opiate addiction, it was going to the armpit of the world.
Sure, like the Walmart.
We were afraid that he wasn't going to make it home. In fact, I told Washington State's probation officer, I won't be able to get my son home. He'll come home in a body bag.
How long was Stephen in Washington before his injury?
26 days. He was shot. And I figured out what had happened, and I've shared that story that I had tracked him and figured out that something was wrong. And through the course of calling police departments, they finally figured out he was the John Doe and I was trying to reach him. And so I ended up going to Washington State and staying for 5 months, to learn how to take care of him because he was shot in the neck, and he was a C5 complete spinal cord injury, which meant he was paralyzed from the chest down and had very limited use of no use of his hands. They were dysfunction. I mean, they just didn't function. They were curled closed, and very limited use of his arms. And to go from somebody who was a thug in the streets with a very strong narcissistic bravado attitude, he was devastated at what had happened to him. And I know from conversations with him then and other people that I trusted that communicated with me, he didn't want to live. At that point, he was really struggling. Now, we did work hard through that 5 to 6 months to get him as much recovery as we could, and I mean therapeutic recovery, physical recovery. And then when we brought him home and him and his girlfriend were reunited, there was a huge push and change in him to want to survive. There was a time period when he lived in our home that there was some positive thriving happening. But in that time period, we had community mental health in our home twice a week. They were coming to our home.
Medically.
Mental health.
Mental health, okay.
Mental health was coming to our home twice a week. Nina was Stephen's girlfriend at the time. She was receiving services, and they were coming to see her. And then he had his therapist that they did Zoom calls, and then they had a community mental health specialist that came to the house, and he had a caseworker. And I had guardianship on him at the time, so I was right up in the middle of making sure all of these services were lined up and happening. We had doctors on board that he was, seeing for his medical necessities, and I orchestrated all of that, and that was a full-time job.
How was Stephen's mental health during this time, would you say?
The first year he lived here, he was discovering what he could do.
Sure.
Like we were reaching out to doctors to see what we could do about nerve transplants. And, he was really researching so many ways to improve the quality of his life. Elon Musk has a program that Neuralink, which is a implant into the brain that replaces some of the catastrophic loss of an injury like that. He was very deep into that. And I kind of feel bad because I really downplayed that because I really felt like that was science fiction too far out, and it's not. But I did downplay that. And I know that was probably, I could have done more to support that for him. And he navigated those services because he knew that if he was going to regain anything, he had to walk those services. He had to reach for that and get those services in place, and he engaged in them.
So in this time period, Stephen's sober, clean, not using, living in your home. Granted, he has a horrible injury, but his frame of mind's got to be entirely...
His frame of mind was actually pretty decent. He had begun to mouth paint, and he'd done some beautiful work painting. He was engaging in some activities outside the home. He started trying to do some workouts. He had connected with some other quadriplegics, not necessarily in our area, but through the internet. And he was engaged in communication and watching what they were doing. And he was like, man, if they can do it, I can do it.
Sure.
So he was really thriving as far as, I think, first of all, he came out of prison with such limited access. Now his access was even more limited.
Okay.
And I think he was asking for help without a whole lot of expectation because he knew he was limited. There was he had state Medicaid. So what he did have was limited through state Medicaid. He knew that I advocated and got a lot of services for him but he didn't even know what he was entitled to.
Sure.
So we were all learning and navigating that at the same time.
Well, when things like that happen, there's not a handbook that they
no.
hand you and says, okay, check the boxes. This is
Right.
what you do, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, nobody's telling you what you can do. They'll tell you what you can't do. But they
No's
won't,
not a problem,
right.
but
But they won't tell you, hey, if you apply for this, like for instance, he needed caretaking. And it took another gentleman who was quadriplegic to tell me that's called the IOW waiver, and you are entitled to that, but you have to ask for it. If I had not met that man, I would not known that we could have had state care or state paid caretakers.
sure.
And then another person shared with us about they're never going to give you what you need. So these are the ways that you go about getting this to get as much as you can get.
Sure.
And so we learned through trial and error, but I navigated through the state Medicaid system to get him a decent care plan package for someone to come take care of him because
Well, you're treating two things here also.
Yeah.
You've got this mental health addiction piece, and now you have this medical piece that are, that's a different avenue down the Medicaid path in and of itself.
Yeah.
And the combination of both is probably not a common thing.
No, not at all. And then, once Stephen had been here for a couple of, I guess he was here a year and a half, we had a change in caretakers. And that caretaker was the beginning of the downfall for us. She played a good part of, carrying on like she was a good person, but really ultimately she brought him some M30s, which I'll let you tell the audience what M30s are.
They're opiates.
Yeah.
It's what Stephen wanted.
It's what he wanted. He manipulated, I'm sure. I'm not going to downplay Stephen's part of that. And she got it for him, and he began to change immediately.
Well, pain management had to be a piece of this whole medical.
Yeah, so Stephen was on. So listen, I was a mom that wasn't okay with pain meds.
Sure.
After everything we've been through.
Absolutely.
So he had used Suboxone, and then we tapered off Suboxone, about 6 months worth of tapering. So that's a slow taper.
Sure.
And then we got him completely off of everything. He did take baclofen for nerve issues, and he did take gabapentin as well because he did have neurological pain.
Absolutely.
And we also suspected that he may have been saying he was in more pain than he was to get the gabapentin because he knew I wasn't going to get him any opiates. We were not going to do opiates. And again, my perception of the devil that stole my son, I wasn't going to be okay with you giving us more of it.
Showed up in an M30.
Right. And so anytime we did surgeries, I was completely, I'm sure to the point that medical staff was like, oh my God, this mom is over the top. Because I was like, we're not doing opiates. You figure out another care plan, or you figure out another way to manage the pain. But he is not getting opiates because I can't reduce him off of them if you start him again. Or
Sure.
I can, but it's a whole process.
Triggering. It's very triggering a lot of things.
So this caretaker came into our home. I still struggle with it. It's very triggering for me because she lied to my face, batted her eyes, and not me. I would never do that, blah, blah, blah. Because I caught her, and I didn't necessarily catch her. I had caught wind of her significant other offering Nina some drugs. And Nina came to me and said, we got to get him out of here because they're gonna screw Stephen up. And sure enough, it had already happened. And Stephen began to transition back into his old self of, I'm not going to live here. You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm moving out of here. You can't stop me. I want my guardianship resolved. This huge battle started. And so I took him and helped find him a place to live through Section 8 waivers, getting him what he needed. I still tried to provide what he was asking, but it is as much of a controlled, supportive environment as I could manage. And At some point, it became too much for Nina. Nina's sobriety had to be the most important thing for her. And at some point, she needed to leave the situation.
Well, and that's a lot to put on.
It was too much to put on her.
Put on anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, especially an addict early in recovery that's trying to find their foundation. You know, that's a lot of stress.
It was.
A lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, and Nina and I have done a lot of talking and working through that. And we both were in survival mode. And I don't hold it against her. And she's a part of our lives to this day because I know she loved him, but he was killing her at the same time. And she was not going to survive it if she stayed.
So at this point, Stephen has moved out.
He's
living
moved out
independently as much as possible.
So he had a caretaker.
A different one, I'm assuming.
Another caretaker. Her name was Amanda. She was amazing. I want to make sure that's very clear because Amanda was a rock star. She had dealt with some addiction in her life with family members. So she knew the bullshit. She knew how to call the bullshit out. She knew how to, and she didn't walk out on him if he, relapsed and she, caught wind of it. She didn't just leave him high and dry. That girl tried everything she could do to be a part of his life and be supportive in a positive way. And in the end, a year, she gave it a good hard year with him. And in the end, she had to step away because she didn't want to get caught up into something that was, one, illegal, two, dangerous for her because of the people that were coming in and out of his home at that point. He had made friends with everybody that was of that connoisseur. If they were into opiates or meth, he was their best friend.
Absolutely.
And they...
you got to create a network.
He created a network. And they seen a vulnerable person that didn't take much to have to take from him.
Well, and a lot of individuals that are living that lifestyle don't have a place to go. And Stephen provided...
He provided everything.
Provided a space that was safe for people that didn't necessarily have anywhere to go. So...
For sure.
It was a give and take.
It was. And it was sick. And it was hard to sit and watch that.
As a mom, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And you didn't have guardianship at this point.
No, guardianship had been reversed. And
how did that happen?
Yeah, so Stephen legally had access to a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney that represents some cases minors. In other cases, he was awarded the state. Actually, he wasn't awarded the state. He was. I can't remember the term, but he had a guardianship on him, so he was a ward. He requested that the guardian work towards getting the, I need to make sure I clarify that. He reached out to the guardian ad litem, requested that they start the process to reverse the guardianship, which meant that he would have had to have had a forensic psychologist come and do an assessment on him. That forensic psychologist did that assessment via Zoom.
This is during COVID.
During COVID.
I'm guessing. Okay.
And that was not adequate, in my opinion.
And so they were basing the guardianship off his mental health and not taking into consideration his medical necessities.
So the way that it actually worded, and we were blown away at the wording, that because he had a controlled environment of a mother that was making sure he was getting all of his needs met, going to the doctor, preventing the drug use around him, his environment was stable. And in this moment, he has the stability to manage his own life.
Because it's all in place, though.
But it was all in place.
Right.
And it did then go and talk about the guardianship paperwork said, given his history of drug addiction and psychosis that was associated with it, that if he would to relapse, he wouldn't meet the criteria. But at this particular moment, because he was not in any relapse psychosis. He met the criteria
to have it lifted.
And
what was the plan from there?
The plan was there was no plan. They lifted the guardianship.
And Stephen said, here
Stephen
it goes.
says, I can do whatever the hell I want to do.
Okay.
And as soon as, the ink wasn't even dry on the paperwork and he was high.
Okay.
So,
living independently as much as possible.
Right. He had people, first of all, he couldn't get anybody to come do the caretaking legally because nobody could pass a background check. So,
of the people that he's selecting,
correct? Of the people he selected.
Right.
Nobody could pass the background check, but they were all showing up over there because he was providing them other means to come caretake for him.
Absolutely.
But they weren't truly taking care of him. They were doing what they needed to satisfy him in order for them to gain off of him.
Well, everybody's feeding their own addiction in this process.
Exactly. It was a very, it was ugly.
That went on for how long?
6 months.
6 months. And then did Stephen reach a point where he realized he needed some?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he had one or two caretakers that could pass the background, but they were drug addicts. And they were coming and clocking in and taking all of his hours, but they weren't doing any of the work. So they were stealing hours. And I finally had enough evidence of that, and I turned him in.
Okay.
And so the state basically removed the care plan.
Okay.
So now he didn't have access to anybody to get paid to get care. And that was a hard decision for me to do because I realized I was taking his care from him. I was letting the natural consequences hit him. And
forcing his hand.
And these people that were getting $1,000 a week to use on drugs, they were angry at me.
Well, and their Medicaid fraud is what's happening.
Yeah, it's Medicaid fraud is what it was. And they were, coming, very verbal with me about what was happening. And I was like, I don't care. You're killing him.
Sure.
I'm stopping you from killing him.
Well, and I don't feel like in this time any of those individuals are taking any type of medical care, not providing like that. I'm sure Stephen wasn't being bathed on a regular basis.
No, he had a stage 4 bed wound at this point where he was not being taken care of.
And that requires a whole other level of care. So the medical piece of this is one avenue that's going to shit for lack of a better term.
Yeah, he was deteriorating medically very quickly.
Plus he's using on top of this.
Yes, and he was down to very thin weight.
And we need to make sure that everybody listening remembers in the story, Stephen cannot use his hands or his arms.
Correct.
So for Stephen to be using, someone is giving Stephen drugs.
They are administering whatever means is being used.
Correct.
So what I would like for us to talk about is the opiates that he's using is fentanyl at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So he's either smoking it or he's shooting it. And in order to smoke it, he couldn't hold it because he can't open his hands. He can't light a lighter. So somebody has to actually do the deed and hold it to his mouth. And they would be smoking it with a pipe off of a piece of foil.
And holding the pipe in his mouth and holding the foil. Let's create the visual here.
Yeah, you're holding the foil.
Yes.
And holding the pipe to his mouth.
Correct.
To get him high.
Yes.
That's how Stephen had to get high. Or they're shooting him up. And we did find later on that there were track marks on his body. So it had been done both ways. There was evidence in the house.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Of all of it. So we were dealing with people that were literally going to kill him, even if it was him requesting it to be done. They were making the choice to bridge the gap of a moral bridge.
Well, and fentanyl at this point, so this is what, in 21? So
I'm sorry, I take that back. Would have been 23 and 24.
Okay, so fentanyl at this point, just from my own perspective, working in this field, is potent.
Yes.
And so for someone to administer potentially a lethal dose of fentanyl every single time that they are doing this, you are really literally playing God.
So I had been taking Narcan to the house.
Uh-huh.
I had Narcan taped on his wall next to the light switch. And I was handing Narcan to everybody. When I would come in, I would be running people off, but I'd be handing them Narcan at the same time.
Sure.
Because I had to make sure that there was Narcan there for him.
Sure.
And I told everybody, listen, I don't care. You can lie, you can say whatever you want. I said, but I need everyone to have this Narcan because if you kill him, I'm coming after you. You better be giving it to him.
When a dead person never has the opportunity to get clean.
Absolutely. A Narcan is an opportunity for tomorrow to make the decision to get clean.
Could be that one more chance.
Exactly.
Makes a difference.
Stephen had been administered Narcan in that last 6 months that I know of at least 20 times.
While he lay in bed. Unable to get himself high, so somebody's getting him high and then bringing him back.
And the reason I know that is because I was supplying the Narcan. EMS and the police department have it on record of 4 to 5 times that they administered.
That they were called.
Because
oftentimes in these situations, people don't call. Yes. And even though there's Good Samaritan in the state of Missouri, laws that protect folks in these types of situations for if somebody does overdose, they can call 911. And most of the time, nobody calls.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And so we had, I just associated while you were saying that because it was just memories of people calling me and saying something's going on over here because these people are running around trying to find Narcan.
Well, and as a mother of a child that does opiates, in the back of your mind, you said earlier, in the back of your mind, what phone call is it going to be?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I lived in anticipatory grief.
Sure.
That last year of his life. But that last 6 months, I held my breath solid for 6 months, knowing that the phone calls, which one was going to be the call. And police calls in the middle of the night or neighbor calls in the middle of the night because he lived in an apartment complex. And I gave the phone number to everybody in that apartment complex. And there was police officers in this community that probably broke the protocol because they would call me and they would tell me, you need to get over here. And so that last 6 months was really bad. It was dangerous. It was, I had reached out to his dad because I told his dad they didn't have a close relationship. I told his dad, if you don't come up here and work on this right now, you're not going to have it. It's going to be gone. And I had begged his dad to come, and he did. And he was ill-equipped, unfamiliar with drug addiction, had no idea what he was dealing with. And I was 24 years deep in it with my son.
Sure.
So I was very intolerant to my ex-husband's ignorance.
Sure.
And it was tough. He lived out of town. I let him come stay in our home so that he could to make it as convenient as possible because I knew that was an unresolved issue for my son. And I don't think in time I realized that I was trying to make sure that they had a chance to clear that up. Sorry, that kind of hit me. I didn't realize at that time, I was trying to make sure that there were no regrets. Even on my part, I didn't want to regret not getting his dad here. And they did. They communicated. They were seeing each other through maybe a once a month visit that last few months. I can remember Stephen. There was a big, huge mess that happened at his house. Some girl that was there more than she was anywhere else destroyed his house, turned his house upside down in a drug-fueled anger fit, and left him helpless, laying in bed, destroyed a wheelchair, just ran amok in his house. And his dad had been on his way here when that happened. And a few hours later, when he showed up here, I said, well, let's go over there because it's going to be a mess. I haven't been there yet. I was waiting for you to get here so we can go. Is Dad and I walking in the door, and we haven't been in front of Stephen together since he was 4.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't seen us in the same room together. And the look on his face to see us both in the same room, picking up stuff.
In the middle of a mess.
In the middle of a mess. We're walking over, picking up couch cushions, picking up cups, and we're cleaning.
Out of love for him.
Out of a love for him. And I remember Stephen sitting, he's laying in his bed. And at that time, he had his bed in the living room. He was laying in his bed, and he goes, this is fucked up. He goes, what the fuck? My mom and my dad, and I never could lower my guard with Stephen because he would weaponize it. I couldn't laugh with him. I just looked at him and I said, we're here for you. And then I walked into the bathroom and cried because I was giving him something he really needed. And we cleaned the house. And we had kind words to each other as we were working.
Showing up as his mom.
Yeah. And he was, he was good with it for a little while. Then he was angry. Like, you guys get out of my house. You guys don't need to be in my house. I'm done. Get out of here, And we finished up what we could. And we said, okay. And his dad says, I'll be back tomorrow. And we left. We spent maybe 3 hours in the house getting it back together. And then he kicked us out. And then his dad would show back up the next day. And his dad would come into town for 3 or 4 days, once a month, and do that the last few months of his life.
And Stephen now, at this point, is wanting to get some help. Is this the point where...
it was kind of so bizarre. He didn't want anybody to come over. And then he would call and say, come, I need help.
What help was Stephen asking for?
It could be anything. Some days it would be everybody had used up all of his drugs and he didn't have any help to get clean that day.
Sure.
Or to get food that day. And I would have to go in and he wouldn't let me do the hygiene stuff, but I would go over and prepare food, bring him food, and maybe get him into his wheelchair. And I would say to him, you can't keep going like this. We got to get you into some services. And he would say, I know, I'm about ready there. I'm about ready to do it. So at that point, I had begun to find out when he was ready, because it seemed like he was getting ready to make that decision. I had been calling treatment centers to find out where I could even take him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had an ostomy, he had a catheter, he couldn't fix his own food, he couldn't drink on his own without a special cup, he was in, at one point I heard somewhere in the medical, somebody had referred to him as a 4th stage drug addict.
Never heard that.
Like cancer, 4th stage cancer.
Makes sense.
And that he was, he was in bad shape. And so I had begun calling rehabs. Can you take a person with these needs? And every single rehab that I called, and he was limited to the state of Missouri because it would be Medicaid that would pay for it. He is beyond our scope of care.
Okay. We
don't have a nursing staff. And I would say, you don't need a nursing staff. None of his caretakers are nursing trained. It is a independent waiver that requires him to be able to give verbal description or interpretation of what his needs are.
Stephen, so just so we can provide some context, Stephen was not dumb.
Oh no, he was completely mentally intact.
And smart.
And very smart.
And so he could...
highly intelligent.
Articulate his needs very well.
Absolutely.
So there wasn't there was no issue.
Barrier there of describing what he needed.
Okay.
He could tell you, I need you to put me in this Hoyer lift. You take the piece and put it underneath me, and you hook it to he could tell you
The
all
process.
of that because he had to do that for all of these other people that were using. If he was describing his needs and getting his needs met by verbally just requesting it, and these people were capable of doing it, Stephen could explain it to anybody. So there was no high education or specialty training. The state of Missouri only requires you to have a background check for abuse and neglect or charges of any, as long as you can pass that background check, which is the same background check that you get as a school bus driver.
Right.
Or to work in the school district. So if you can pass that background check, that's all you need to be a caretaker. The rest of it is self-directed by the patient. And so I'm calling these rehabs and explaining, you don't need a specialty caretaker.
And you're looking for residential treatment,
I'm assuming. For residential treatment.
Okay.
Because
substance abuse primary.
However, he was, dual because he had mental health with it.
Okay.
And I had people literally hanging the phone up even when I'm trying to explain. No, I don't. I can even get a caretaker. We can bring a caretaker. Well, that's too much of a risk. We can't have an outsider in this program. We can't have somebody coming and going. And no program in the state of Missouri would take him.
Okay.
They all said, that's not something we do. That's not anything we have policy written on. That is not going to happen.
So those in the avenue that you're looking for residential treatment, were there other opportunities or other solutions that were suggested since residential clearly is not an option?
Yeah. We were told that we could do community mental health where we would go and do outpatient programs.
Okay.
And so I went to Stephen and I said, this is what your options are. I need to take you to X, Y, and Z in Warrensburg, and this is the program. These are the only programs I can get you into.
So I'm assuming also when you were looking for services for Stephen, did you go down the route of looking at it from a medical perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Get him in a medical facility that then they could, on the back end, treat the addiction as well.
I absolutely knew that if I could get him into a hospital setting, and he had enough medical problems, all I had to do is run him through an emergency room, and they would have admitted him because he had a 4th stage bed wound at this point.
Right.
If I got him in a hospital, that meant that there would have to be a social worker that could not release him without a care plan.
Okay.
And then I could advocate for a care plan that would include drug rehab. So I reached out to a couple of previous social workers that we had worked with in the past in other hospitals because I had developed these relationships. And all 3 of these women told me they've never done that before. They've never had a disabled person that needed to go to rehab that would be released from the hospital to go to rehab. We've never worked a care plan to put that person into rehab that has a disability. She goes, I don't know that exists.
How does it feel to hear that?
It was devastating. It was devastating because you can't tell me that he's the only disabled person that's ever needed intensive drug treatment.
And at this point, is Stephen willing?
So he was having more and more people just dump and run on him.
Sure.
And I was having to let that course run because I had to let the natural consequences get him to the point where he was ready to do something. Because at this point in anybody's active addiction, you have to get to the decision yourself. I know I can't force him to do it. And he called me, I think it was on a Friday. And he started talking to me about he needs to go get some services. And I said, okay, what services are you wanting? Because he knew anything, medical, dental, mental health, whatever. I was going to run and help him get it.
Sure.
I still had a van that I could transport him in, and I was going to do it. So he called me, started talking to me about it. And I said, well, son, it's Friday. And I could still hear I have to wait till Monday. Like he didn't even know what day of the week he was talking to me on. And I said, I can't do anything till Monday, but they open at 9 a.m. and we can be there at 9 a.m. and you have to do an assessment. You know that you got to do the assessment. And he was like, okay, all right, I'll do okay. All right, Monday we'll do this.
Well, there's one gap in the system. I mean, drug addiction doesn't stop on the weekend.
It does not. So I said, okay, I'll get you there on Monday. So I checked in on him a couple of times through the weekend, and, he was a mess. And
was he still using?
Oh, yeah. He was at the point he had to use.
Sure.
I mean, there wasn't
enough that he didn't want to. It was the withdrawal.
Yeah, he had to use. And Monday rolls around. I mean, I had to call in to work that day because I wasn't going to miss the opportunity. He's saying he wants to go. He hadn't said, I want to go in a long time. And that was him asking to go. So you bet. I'm going to take off work and I'm going to do it.
This is Monday.
That was Monday.
Okay.
I went to the house and he wasn't ready.
Oh.
And I'm angry.
Of course.
Oh, I'm angry. I have missed work to do this. And anybody who's had a kid in addiction, you know that they play that game of dragging their feet. One more time. It'll be,
everything from here to the moon is going to be the excuse as to why I do not have to go.
Yes. And so and they wouldn't answer the door. And finally, I yell from the door, I'm going to use the language I used. If you don't open this motherfucking door, I'm calling the police and we're doing a welfare check. And you know damn good and well they're not going to just knock on the door and walk away. They'll come through the fucking window. I'm not playing games. I'm sitting out here in this van and I'm ready to take you. And he calls me. And he said, Mom, I'm in the middle of getting a bath. I'm sorry. Give me a little bit. He goes, go away and come back in an hour. And I said, Stephen, do you know how many times I've heard you tell me, come back and I'll do it? I said, I'm sitting my ass right here. If I have to sit here for 3 hours, I'm sitting right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And I knew that he could hear me. And I said, I don't know who's in there getting you ready, but I'm going to tell you right now, you better get your ass moving and get him finished. And about an hour later, the door opens and he comes out in his wheelchair. And it was another known user girl that he hung out with that was getting him ready. And it's this awkward, weird dance that if somebody did something to help get him ready, I still said thank you to them.
Well, of course.
Because if they hadn't gotten him ready, he wouldn't have let me come in and get him ready. And I think she knew that he was at the point where if he didn't get help, because she said to him, Stephen, go with your mom, go do what you got to do. I'll be here when you get back.
Okay.
And I loaded him in that van. And when I say I loaded him in the van, it's a lift. You drop the lift, you put him on the lift, you put him in there, and then you have to hook him in.
Mm-hmm.
You lock his wheelchair in. And I waited until I had him completely locked in. And I said, I got down at his level, looked him in the eyes, and I said, do you remember when you were out running on the streets? And you said, if anybody ever fucks with you, I'll kill him. I got you, Mom. You don't ever have to worry about somebody harming you. It's not going to happen. Not with me around. And I said, haven't you realized that the roles have reversed?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you understand? I want to harm every person that's harming you. Don't you understand? I want to protect you. I want to make sure nobody harms you. And it's so hard for me to be here and see these people coming and going out of your apartment that are harming you.
Right.
I said, I want to protect you. I got your back. And Stephen was notorious for he had a cell phone that he had a little strap that he could hold his phone. And he was notorious, he had a knuckle he could use to scroll with. And he was notorious for blocking everybody out.
Sure.
And just doing this. With this grimace look on his face. There's just this, that was kind of his bravado at that point. And he wore a flat rim baseball cap, usually Kansas City Chiefs. And he lifts his head and he looks at me under the rim of that baseball cap. And he just eye to eye. And he shook his head.
You knew in that moment Steven wanted some help.
I knew in that moment he understood. I would do whatever it took. And he was going to let me. I knew in that moment we were going for help.
There was a change.
That was him saying, I surrender. That was his surrender.
All right.
And I walked up, sat in that van seat, that driver's seat, put it in gear, and I drove like a bat out of hell.
I'm sure. Just
so I could get him there. And we pulled in, and there was always this fear of when I get him off this van, he can run. That wheelchair traveled faster than I could run. But he rolled right through the front doors. And he sat in that waiting room while I filled out the paperwork. And it was a long wait. And I was nervous every minute that ticked. Because he could say, Stephen was the king of fuck it.
Right.
And he went, they called his name. And he turned and he looked at me. He says, you coming? And he allowed me to go with him.
Well, and in that time also, Stephen's not using. So hours have passed, and if you're using fentanyl in the manner that Stephen was using it, he's not feeling well.
No. He was beginning to get very grumpy. We went in. I sat with him. It's a telehealth appointment with a psychiatrist that did about an hour and a half of an intake over telehealth.
Okay.
And he was honest. He told her how much he'd been using, what he'd been using. They talked about what services were available for him to use, and that he would have a social worker and basically somebody puts together a care plan. And that she would write it all up, and that they would be in touch with him within 24 to 48 hours to get started with services.
What about the active withdrawal?
I failed to ask in that moment with that psychologist because my focus was on making sure he was honest.
Sure.
Did he tell her all of this? Because I didn't want to be the crazy mom out here telling his business, but I wanted to make sure if he failed to say it, that I would say to him, Stephen, don't you think you need to tell her this?
Sure.
I was trying to get him to, and he did. He didn't leave anything off. Out of all the times he's talked to somebody, he was probably the most honest in that moment. Then we left that room and he went and did a UA. And he's in a catheter. They handed the cup to me and I drew the urine out and handed it back to them. And it was a large panel test. He tested, it was a Christmas tree. He tested positive for everything. Even things he didn't even realize he wasn't, it's like,
sure.
Where did I get the benzos from? And, he didn't even know it. He tested positive for meth, the fentanyl, the opiates, the, what's the other thing that they...
MDMA.
MDMA. And then there was also amphetamine and methamphetamine. They tested different for both.
They test both, yeah.
Yeah. So he was everything. And I had asked them, I said, what can we do? Because he's either going to continue to use because he doesn't want to go through withdrawal. And they said, okay, so we'll have to get with our team and figure out what we're doing. So, you're going to have to give us a couple of days to figure this out. In the meantime, we'd like to have him back here tomorrow. And I went, what's he coming back tomorrow for? Well, we'd like to put him in some group therapies. And I said, okay, how do we get him here? Well, like you did today. I said, do you understand he's disabled? He cannot drive. He can't even ride passenger in a vehicle because of his disability. He didn't have a wheelchair that can be loaded into a car. His wheelchair requires a lift. And
Previous to this, Stephen had been on Suboxone before. Is that
yes,
correct?
yeah,
So Stephen had a knowledge of what Suboxone was. You had a knowledge of
very well.
what Suboxone was. And wherever you had gone to get services, did not discuss any type of medicated assisted treatment at this point?
Yeah, so there was no discussion of that. I asked them, can we, what are we doing for Matt? And they said, well, we need to get with our team and figure out what we're going to be comfortable with doing.
Okay.
And I said, okay, so you're going to talk to him tomorrow, you're going to call him tomorrow. And I said to them right then in that moment, take my phone number because he's disabled and a lot of times he cannot answer his phone. Sometimes he's dropped his phone and he can't reach it. Sometimes he goes to answer it and he can't answer it in time. So use my number.
Sure.
And he told them, same thing, call my mom. So they had me listed as his first phone number. They had his number too. And so we left there that day. And I told him how proud I was of him for being honest, to be really talking about this. And he had said he needed, he wanted to go into some of the, I remember before we left there, I told him, how are we going to get services for him? They were like, well, he needs to come here. And I'm like, that's not a possibility. I said, I can try and do it occasionally, but you guys aren't even open on the weekends. I said, how am I supposed to do that and have a job?
Right.
I said, not only that, but he won't let me.
And this is post-COVID, yes?
Yes, post-COVID.
Okay.
2024.
Okay.
I said, he won't even let me be transporting him that often. I said, he doesn't want me every day around him. So how do we do this? And that's when they all got just flustered, like, well, you need to bring him here. He just needs to be here. And I said, wait, you're a community mental health services, which means those cars that are sitting outside with the name of this place on the side of those cars means that the community service can be brought to the community. So when he was getting the same services before, you all were coming to our house once or twice a week. Why can't you go to his house? Why can't you do the same thing you were doing before? He had these services. You've got history and records of him being seen through the same services.
Was it the same agency?
Same agency.
Okay, just curious.
I said, why can't we do that now? Oh, well, we don't really do that anymore.
So there was no meeting Stephen where he was at.
And I said, then you need to get a hold of the caseworker from before and talk with his whole team from before because they're familiar with him. Get his team on board. We'll re-engage with that team. We just need to have that same setup. Okay, great. That sounds like a good plan. Stephen will be in touch. And we left.
Okay.
And 3 days go by.
And when you leave there, you're obviously very happy that Stephen has reached out. He's being honest. He's doing all the things.
Yeah.
How do you feel that he's being told no?
So he was pretty disgusted by it. He was like,
maybe it wasn't so much a no.
We didn't feel like it was no at that moment.
Okay.
So he was kind of disgusted that he'd spent his whole day with no game plan.
Sure. And he's in withdrawal.
And he has no MAD. And I had offered to take him to get something to eat. He was angry. Just take me home. And I knew he was going home to get high.
Sure.
And at that point, I'm done talking. I'm hurt because you're right, Stephen. We did spend the entire day and we don't have any more answers now than we did before we walked in here.
Sure.
So I took him home. Same girl was at the house. I knew what was going to happen. I dropped my son off and I went home. And 3 days later, I'm calling him. I mean, I called him before then, but day 3, I'm like, Steven, have you heard from your mental health workers? No, haven't heard a word. I go, have you called them? No, I haven't called them. I said, okay, can I call them? Yep. Because he'd signed all the paperwork for me to be on his authority to be able to call and talk to him. So I called. And of course, I only got the people at the front desk, couldn't get them to, put me through to anybody. Well, they'll give them the message. Okay. Day 4 went by. I called him again. It was this repeated gatekeeping that I couldn't get a hold of anybody. Finally, probably a week into trying to get a hold of them, I finally got a hold of, I think it was the same person that did the drug test, and I think it was a caseworker. And she said, yeah, we've got a thread of an email going around for all of us trying to coordinate his services. We're trying to get therapy set up. I said, you understand it's been a week. You understand he's in active use because there's no services in place. There's no process of getting him any services. And we're just sitting here waiting for you guys to get your shit together. And she says, well, we've got people out of town or we've got meetings going on. We'll get back to you. And again, a couple more days go by, I call him again. And it was just more of this, we're all just still trying to figure out what we're going to do with him. Yes, I spoke with the therapist that had him on case before. She's willing to take him again, but we're trying to get other things lined up. It was just this constant, we're trying to get our shit together. We're trying to get our shit together. We'll be in touch.
But nobody in this, what I'm hearing you're saying is no one's talking about that he's actively using fentanyl that could potentially kill him every single day.
Absolutely.
Nothing about what we're going to do for withdrawal. Nothing about how we can get him off the fentanyl. No discussion of that. No, let's see a provider to get you some type of medication.
They have the drug test in front of them.
Correct.
They know he's using because I'm telling them every day that we don't have services is just another day he's going to use.
Sure.
And they're like, we know, we understand that.
Did they ever offer Narcan to your son?
I believe they did hand him Narcan the day we were there. They did hand him Narcan. And I actually told them, I said, I've got a back seat full of Narcan. And I was flippant and sarcastic about it because your box of Narcan isn't the fix. This isn't the Band-Aid we're looking for.
No, not at all.
So it wasn't until, don't quote me on the days, but somewhere around 23 to 28 days later, Stephen had, the scenario and what happened to Stephen, we call it an overdose, but really what happened is Stephen had been roaming through the town in complete psychosis. He was running through town with his wheelchair, just going from one drug place to another drug house. Just, I don't know if he was searching for use or if he was but he wasn't at home. And he was roaming around. And at one point, he ended up there's 2 little bars in this community. One of them is not a good bar. And he ended up, that's the bar he liked to go to. He had a couple of medical emergencies in that bar, and they didn't care for him to be in there. Stephen began to, I think he was showing the signs of overdose. And somebody in that bar asked him to leave because they didn't want an ambulance called to him in their bar. And he left the bar, and we don't know if it was on his own or if somebody took him and maneuvered his wheelchair. But he ended up trying to find help and was at the police station a few blocks away and is on camera trying to get the attention of the police department at the door. And
by himself.
In a wheelchair.
Higher than a kite.
And they did not have a handicap entrance for the police department. So he's with a hand that doesn't work, banging it at the door, which isn't making any noise.
And nobody came.
And a while later, a police officer drove their vehicle by and seen him and then stopped and called 911 because he was lethargic.
Sure.
Not not responding well. And he was asking them to call an ambulance. Stephen was asking them to call help for him. And then they transported him to the local community hospital. And once he was there, he was intubated. And then I showed up at that hospital. Police department called me, I think is how I found it. No. The hospital called me and told me he was there and wanted to know if I still had guardianship on him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I don't have guardianship on him, but I'm still his mother. What's going on? And they said, okay, well, we can't give out any more information. So I ended up showing up there. And he was intubated at that point. They legally didn't have the right to tell me to leave because once he's intubated, he doesn't have the ability to say he doesn't want somebody there. So they should have allowed me to see him, but they didn't. So I told them he is beyond their scope of care. He is a critically ill patient that needs higher level care, and that I was leaving to go to my attorney's office to go get the guardianship, and they had better be smart enough to get him transported before I come back. And then I was escorted out of I'm being very nice about how this went down. I was escorted out of the hospital.
Well, as a mom who's been in a constant state of fear for quite some time with that phone call, that unfortunately the phone call that you knew was coming, and to hear that your son has been at the police station in a wheelchair all by himself trying to get help, and the community that you live in clearly knows who Stephen is. They are well aware that Stephen is an opiate addict, and no one Narcans him at all.
No.
It's got to be hard. Hard probably is not the word.
And I think the hardest part for me is there were so many things that were done wrong. But when you're in that state of tragedy, you don't have the ability to ask, why did you do that? How come you didn't do this?
Oh, well, no.
You don't have the ability. You're taking it in and you're putting yourself in that moment of imagining what he was going through. And at that point, he was still alive. So the last thing I was doing was focusing my attention on everybody who'd done something wrong. I was trying to be in the moment at a hospital.
Sure.
Because in all honesty, in that moment, our family has joked about Stephen being a cockroach. Like, Stephen survives everything. And I thought this was going to be another survival story.
Sure.
And I locked him down at the hospital because I showed up with a guardianship this time. And I said, enough people have sucked the life out of him. Nobody has access to him.
How long was the time frame from when you lost guardianship until you got it again?
6 months.
And in that 6 months, it was just detrimental.
It was, yeah. It was chaos on steroids.
And Stephen's use, I'm sure, escalated.
Oh, bad. Yeah, his use was... So let me explain that part of it. So he was intubated and transferred to Truman Medical Center.
Okay.
And they're used to seeing extreme cases. They're a higher level trauma hospital. And we had he had a sitter in the room so that so nobody could have access to him. But if he come to, then there was somebody there that could push a button, call, whatever. They had to have a sitter on him. I shut down no communication out of the hospital. Nobody can come see him unless I cleared it. I didn't want any more access because they had done all the damage they were going to do to him. The hospital staff was amazing. They told me I didn't need a guardianship. I was his mother. But they took it anyway.
Right.
Because the first hospital wouldn't let me have access to him. So I came both barrels in at Truman. And they said, well, you don't need a guardianship. You're his mother. And he's intubated. And he needs his family. And as long as you're not harmful to him, we're not going to ask you to leave.
Did Stephen have a living will?
No. And there was times that Stephen came off the intubator, but he was still so depleted of oxygen that he had to have a PAP on.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephen, even if he came, like there was like a day that he was off of an intubator, but he was still so incapacitated, he wasn't conscious. He just
Sure.
was able to breathe on his own,
Sure.
but not without the help assistant of a PAP. So he never was actually laying in the hospital with nothing on him. He was constantly in higher medical care.
Sure.
And I remember the day that he had come to enough that he knew where he was at, and he was on the BiPAP on his face. And he grabbed one of the nurses, and I thought, oh boy, here we go. He's going to tell them to make me leave. Because there was this contentious between him and I.
Right.
I didn't know if he was out of psychosis enough to know how bad he was. Because you could still be in psychosis and make people leave when you're dying.
Well,
and he was without oxygen for so long, you don't know his mental state.
No, and his mental state and his physical, how he,
Yeah.
you know, he's been heavily using fentanyl for some time. So I'm sure, you know, that is.
He reaches over and he grabs this male nurse, and this nurse comes down close to his face to hear him. And Stephen's trying to push this off of his mouth, and they don't want it off because
Right.
he's not, his O2 is going to drop.
Right.
He pulls it to the side a little bit, and he says, he looks over at me, and he says, he goes, "That's my mom." You know, he's struggling to speak. "That's my mom." And he says, the guy looks at, he goes, "Yeah, that's your mom." And he says, and I figured that's when he was going to say, "Make her leave," you know, or "I don't want her here," or something. He says, "Don't fuck with her. That's my mom. She's super mom." And it took multiple breaths to get all of that out.
Sure.
And the relief of knowing that he wanted me there. I walked over and I held his hand. And mind you, he can't grip your hand. So I laced my fingers between his fingers. And I said, "I love you." And just that little bit of talking wore him out. And he shook his head. "And I love you too." And he went back to sleep. And that was the only conscious time I had with him. I had to go home. They were strict on their visiting hours, and I went home. And they called me in the middle of the night and said that he was declining and that they wanted to put him back on the ventilator.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Is this a therapeutic reason to put him on the ventilator, or are we putting him on the ventilator because he's not going to come off of it?" And they said, "Well, we need to go in and do a procedure where we go in and we clean the mucus out of his lungs. And you cannot do that if I don't have them on the ventilator." And he says, "I believe we can bring him off the ventilator, but I don't know until we get in there and clear his lungs," because he was now developing pneumonia.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's quadriplegic laying on his back.
Sure.
And so they did that procedure, and I went back in the next day. And at that point, I knew we weren't going to get him back. There was just the facial muscles in his face weren't the same. He was not. I've seen Stephen in a hospital on an intubator many a times. My son wasn't there. And at that point where I called his dad and I said, "Get here. I don't care how fast you get here." And I called Nina, and I hadn't spoken to Nina in months. But she was the love of his life, and they talked all the time. They were still talking. She was there in 30 minutes. I got his little brother on an airplane. I called my husband. I called some family friends. I called Amanda, the caretaker. I called everybody who loved him, who never harmed him. And we all gathered around him, and we spent, I think, 2 days kind of back and forth making multiple people. They allowed us to have quite a few people in there because I think at that point there wasn't going to be rules, because at that point the doctors were saying, I don't think Stephen's, I mean, he had developed another infection somewhere because his temperature had spiked, and they basically were telling us, we would like to leave it another day or two. Well, we don't want to make a decision today, but yeah, you probably need to be bringing some friends in and family in, and. And so I think the third day of that, I just point blank told this doctor, I said, listen, I've gone further than he ever wanted to go, because Stephen had a DNR, but we couldn't find it.
Mm-hmm.
I said, he signed a DNR at another hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They, for some reason, didn't provide you with that.
Mm-hmm.
He's on this ventilator because I wanted him to have a chance. Stephen wouldn't have allowed you to be on that himself to be on that ventilator. And he said, well, you had the guardianship and we followed your instruction. But you're right, he did not want to be on this ventilator. And I kind of was angry at that doctor in that moment, because if he'd have shared that with me, I might not have put him on the ventilator. But because I was the guardian,
Sure.
and he was saying he needed this, it gave him a fighting chance at a 3 a.m. phone call, I said, okay.
And being a mom, you want to hold on.
And I told him, I said, I can't leave him on this ventilator knowing he doesn't want to be here. And he said, if you and your family make that decision, medically, we will support that, because we feel like probably this is that point where we make this decision. And so we all stayed, and then we went home that evening and made that decision. And then the next morning, I am headed to the hospital, and the community mental health people call me. And they said, hey, we were trying to make arrangements to meet with Stephen, and we'd like to set up Zoom. We'd like to do some Zoom. We think if we could set him up to have meetings through Zoom, that we could probably, do some treatment with him. And I said, do you really think that somebody at his stage of drug addiction, you think Zoom's the answer? You think Zoom is sufficient? And she says, well, if you can't get him in here to see us, if you guys can't transport him in here to see him, we're limited. And I said, okay. I said, well, my son's laying in a hospital dying because the fentanyl he's been using is going to kill him. And I said, so you want to come counsel him now? Or you want to wait until he's dead and I'll bring his urn into you? Because 20 some odd days ago, this might have made a difference, but it's not going to make any difference now. I said, I don't know where you think Zoom is sufficient for somebody who's at the end stage of life because of their drug addiction.
How did you feel in that moment? I mean, the timing of this has got to be, a smack in the face.
I traumatized the person on the other side of the phone, because I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version of that.
Sure.
I told him he wasn't worthy of their care and concern to meet his needs. And now that he's laying in a bed dying, and you want to offer Zoom, you can stick that Zoom up your ass.
Well, and in this moment, you're on the way to tell your son goodbye.
Yeah. His life was over. And I told him, my son came to your services not because I made him, but because he asked for help. He knew he was dying. He knew his drug addiction was going to kill him. You were his last chance, his last hope. And you didn't take it seriously enough to find him services or help. You all passed him around for weeks. And now you don't have to worry about him. You can close his case. And I've been angry about it ever since. Because what if this was the time? What if he was ready? And we'll never know. We will never know.
And so following that phone call, you continued your drive.
Yeah.
To the hospital.
I went to the hospital, and same people that I'd asked to be there with me came. I had a family member of mine, friend of the family, friend of my mom's family for many years, come, and they are affiliated with a church, and they came and prayed with us and prayed for Stephen and his passage. And after they left, and my youngest son had gotten here in time, had gotten here the night before. My youngest son was really struggling with this. And Nina was extremely emotional with the realization that she was saying goodbye to him. And I allowed everybody to have their time with him. I said, we are not in any hurry. Everybody gets to sit with him. We'll all leave the room. You can have some privacy. And none of us really made anybody leave. We all shared what we had to share with him in front of everybody. Nina climbed up laid with him in the bed. We knew that this was going to be hard on her because they had a Bonnie and Clyde life story. And I had her there because she was the love of my son's life. And I was honoring him in that moment. And I gathered everybody around him. And they came in and they removed all machines and life support and prepared us for the end. And we didn't know how long it was going to be, but we sat there and talked to him. And it was kind of a quiet, somber moment. And I walked around everybody, and I would tell Logan, who was at the top of the bed, don't leave anything unsaid. Share everything you want to say. I told Nina, talk to him, Nina, tell him he was loved. Jennifer was there, and I told her, I said, you had the childhood with him. You share with him. You guys were kind of on the opposite. She works in law enforcement. I said, let him know how much you still cared about him. His dad came up and spent a few minutes with him. And he, for whatever reason, didn't want to stay and watch him pass. And we all sat there, and it kind of felt like it was just lingering, and he was struggling to breathe. And I made them, I think you'll laugh at this. I hope you will. I brought them back in, hospital people, and I said, push it all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want him suffering. He gets to be high this time. He gets to be as high as he wants to be this time. And my youngest son grabbed me and he says, Mommy, you got to get in there and talk to him because he's not going to go until you talk to him. And I did. I moved in close to him and held his hand. And I slid my other hand underneath the back of his neck. So I was cradling him. And I told him, it's okay, son. You're going to be okay. Where you're going to go is beautiful. And it's going to be glorious. And your grandma is there. And Chris is there waiting for you. And they are loving you. And we are here, but we are telling you it's okay to go. And I said, son, I forgive you. And I know you forgive me. And we will see each other again soon. I said, all's forgiven. It's okay to go. Go on and go. And I kept saying to him, go on and go. It's okay. And he took his last breath. And just like it's silent in this moment, it was silent in that room. And then the wail of a noise came out of me that I didn't know where it came from. But I wailed in this moment of grief of he's really gone. I fought so hard to keep him alive, and now he's gone. And of course, nursing staff comes. I'm sure they're used to hearing that noise. And they came in and took his vitals and pronounced him dead. And we all just sat back, just numb. And of course, a chaplain came in and I didn't want a chaplain in my face. They just wanted to talk to me, and I'm like, stop! I don't want to talk. We're okay.
It's very surreal.
And we're just sitting there, just staring at each other. All of us just sitting there, staring at each other. And then I said, "Everybody, get out of this room. We're not going to sit here over his dead body and talk about him." I said, "Go to the waiting room." And I made everybody leave the room, and then I sat with him for a few minutes. I just told him I loved him and that I was sorry. And I don't really know what I was sorry for, but I was so sorry. Like, is this really it? Is this really the end? Is this really? Did we really run out of every option? Did we really use up every opportunity for your recovery?
You've mentioned, as we've been talking, that ultimately you knew in the back of your mind that Stephen's disease was going to.
I had been in anticipatory grief for a long time.
So when he physically passed, do you think that you were prepared in a different sense? And perhaps
I think it comes with you're no longer in pain.
I was going to say it's a relief in a sense.
Yeah. There's I'm so sorry, son. I hope you're not suffering any longer.
Well, and you had been suffering just as much.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's very unfortunate, to say the very least, of this is the circumstance that you had to play out for Stephen. However, his pain that he was going through, you were carrying just as much weight.
Oh yeah.
And
in some ways more.
Yes.
Because I lived in reality. He lived in psychosis.
Sure.
I knew the repercussion of every bad choice. He was trying to outrun them.
Sure.
So, yeah, and the strange part of that was I left that hospital room with a bag of his belongings. And the group that was there I had already sent them home. I said, go on and go to the house. I have paperwork I have to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
We all had kind of been in separate cars, and Logan had wanted to ride with Nina to make sure she was okay. So I sent them on, and I sat in the waiting area for a minute, kind of. Well, I had to call his dad. I had to call his dad and tell him. And his dad was back at my house, and my husband and him were here at this house. And I remember sitting in this waiting room, and it was a busy waiting room. There was a lot of people in there. And I remember turning my back to turning my face to a corner to have privacy. And people were walking around me like the rest of the world was still continuing on. And I was kind of in this, it's almost like you're disassociating with your own body, because I can remember, okay, now I've said that to him, and everybody is headed to my house, and I need to take his belongings home. I guess I go home. And Truman Hospital is a very busy hospital, so I get on an elevator, and I probably look like I do right now, crying, and I'm holding his belongings in a bag, and we're all silent on this elevator. And then we open it up, and I'm walking out the main lobby, and I'm walking past people coming in and out of a hospital, and it's just almost like a scene from a movie. And I get in my car, and you're just on autopilot, so numb. I just lost my son, and I'm walking out of this hospital alone with his belongings, and I'm going to drive to my home.
It's like you're floating above.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, what do I do now?
Well, this journey with Stephen in his addiction and the progression of his disease has been years. This has
Yeah.
been a
It was like a finale.
yes, and his sickness had become your sickness.
Oh, yeah.
And now he passed away, but you're still here.
Yeah. Yeah. When I just said, now, what do I do now? Honestly, that's what I felt like. What do I do tomorrow?
Well, you've been doing Stephen's disease.
I had been every day, wake up. Where's Stephen? What's going on with Stephen? What do we do with Stephen? Stephen.
Uh-huh.
What do I do tomorrow? And I was very grateful, because back at my house, I had my husband, I had Logan, I had Nina there, I had other family members, or not mostly friends. I had Stephen's dad, and Stephen's dad's wife had drove up. So I had this environment of, we're all going to sit and talk about Stephen. And that was very good for me, because I didn't go home to silence. I didn't go
Sure.
home to,
But that comes.
yeah, it came. But we spent the next couple of days. I mean, we went and made arrangements at a funeral home, and
Everybody wore red.
yeah, yeah. There was just, I wanted to, as a mom of somebody who had long-term drug use, very scary drug use, I had imagined his eulogy. I had imagined what I would have to do, but it's not anything like actually sitting down in a funeral home and saying what we wanted done.
Sure.
And I never dreamed that his dad would be a part of that, and it was. And I never dreamed that those details, those details. And then there was just a lot of hurt and pain, because it didn't take long for this community to find out.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of those deadbeat pieces of shit that had used him up were all trying to get to me. And I shut them all down. I wasn't giving them any answers.
Stephen had a big funeral.
He did.
A lot of people showed up.
He did. Yeah. And it was we didn't take very much time to prepare it. I think 3 days after he passed, we had his funeral. And I purposely had his funeral in the middle of town. I purposely transported his wheelchair with the van and brought that wheelchair in there and set it next to a casket. I wanted the visual of everyone to understand how fragile his life was. And, you know, we did have I was surprised at the amount of people. Now, we also didn't allow the people that harmed him to be a part of that. And, as far as I know, I think only 1 or 2 attempted. And Stephen's dad, being a retired Marine, had no problem with being his own son's bouncer for his funeral. Yeah. I never dreamed that there would be a day that I would tell the story of Stephen's life, because I had lived for so long trying to protect my reputation, protect what I thought. Well, I was a safety professional, and we are expected to be able to manage chaos. And there was this assumption that if I couldn't manage my own chaos, how could I manage chaos for a corporation?
You were managing the chaos.
I managed it. And I made a conscious decision to leave my career because my higher purpose was to share our story, to help others. And in my mind, I'm helping other parents who are lost in their child's addiction and embarrassed and ashamed. I wanted them to see, if I can survive this, you can survive this. If I can make sense out of this loss, you can stay in that fight too. And that's really what I've tried to do. I woke up with a burn in my belly, and I haven't stopped since.
So what does this look like going forward? What is the message that you want listeners to hear today? If you could tell somebody.
I think where I'm hung up at right now, still to this day, is Stephen asked for help.
Okay.
Stephen was trying to utilize mental health and drug addiction, and he was caught between Medicaid not paying for a caretaker for him to be able to even advocate to go to services, and services that didn't have a plan in place for him to go. And they were just quick to say, no, denied, you can't be here. I'm still hung up on how do we change that. I'm still trying to figure out, why was my son not worthy of treatment? Why was his disability the one thing that kept him from recovery or an opportunity of recovery?
Sure.
I'm always going to be his mom. And I know the hell we went through with him. I'm not naive about the troubles. But why do we make the decision that a person in a wheelchair is beyond the scope of care for treatment?
Who makes that decision?
Who makes that decision? And right now, who holds the responsibility for saying no? I don't think anybody is willing to own that. We live with the fallout of that, but I don't believe any agency out there is willing to say, oh, we screwed up. I don't think it'll change until it comes from lawmakers that forces them to go, 1, get the training, and 2, tie in the services.
Well, and I will, as fentanyl is still a common thing, and the complications from folks that continue to use fentanyl, this is going to be more of a common thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I know Stephen's case is not the only case of someone that has a physical disability that desperately needs treatment, and the services just are not in place. And what would that look like if you had the solution? What would the solution be?
My idea is that you utilize at least 2 programs in the state. You just need 2 facilities, 1 on each side of the state. And Medicaid pays for somebody who's on a Medicaid program, disabled, to go to these services. And Medicaid bridges the gap for the caretaker to go with them, or they partner with a temp agency, and that temp agency brings in a person to provide those, it's not nursing care, but it's self-directed care that the patient needs. Ostomy care, catheter care. And this doesn't even have to be somebody that's in a wheelchair. It could be somebody that has a level of spina bifida, or needs
Had a stroke.
It could be any level of disability. But if it requires additional care, they got to be able to bridge that gap and provide the care in that facility.
Medical care needs to be hand in hand with treatment.
Absolutely. You cannot tell me that you can only pick the ideal patient model to service. You cannot do that.
Well, what does an ideal addict look like?
Right, because most addicts have secondary issues as well.
Absolutely.
Stephen's happened to be a disability, and his disability was created out of his addiction.
And lack of service.
Correct.
More or less.
They were all part of his addiction issue. He was disabled because of his addiction.
Well, it's an ever revolving circle. It just goes in a circle, and there needs to be more solution forward focused. Something has to change.
Agreed. And I have gone to the state of Missouri, to Jeff City. I did engage with the Drug and Task Force that is assigned to multiple representatives and state senators sit on that committee. I have presented them with basically a policy change. It needs to be pushed harder. I had to return back to work. It's kind of hard to do everything I want to do, but there is a plan to continue to push for that. I just need to have more eyes on it, more people willing to be a part of helping me go and talk to these lawmakers.
Well, Beyond the Storm, you started this podcast.
Yep.
Getting your story out, getting Stephen's story out, getting other individuals that have had circumstances and in the system the ability to say their side of things. I think that's a raw piece that's missing.
Yeah, absolutely. I have volunteered with the recovery court in Warrensburg. I continue to reach out and share my story. I am today sitting in the seat of my own podcast, but I've been on other podcasts as well. And it's just about sharing the story. It was a year ago that I went to the Jelly Roll concert, and that made a massive impact on my social media because, most generally, the people that engaged in that environment, that seen me in that manner or seen me on the news, a lot of them reached out to me.
I was there and I didn't know you at that point.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Crying my eyes out. Didn't even realize it was Stephen. And I know Stephen. So
you had a history with Stephen.
Yes.
with mental health services. So
yes.
It is kind of funny that people that reached out to me in that environment, because it had just been 41 days after he passed away that we went to the Jelly Roll concert. And
how therapeutic was that for you in that moment?
Oh my God. Well, I know it's crazy to believe this, but Stephen and I had gone to the concert the year before, and Stephen was moved up to side stage by Jelly Roll's team. They often do that for people if they engage with somebody that's disabled. They get them right up there close. We were lucky enough for that to happen. And that was such a blessed encounter because that was the only concert he'd ever been to in his entire life. And I told him he'd never go to another concert like that again and have that experience. So knowing that concert was coming up and Stephen was so out of control, I didn't even talk to him about going to the Jelly Roll concert. Wasn't even going to consider it. But a few days after he died, I'd heard an advertisement and I went, oh, I've got to go. Because I knew that was the only place that I was going to feel Stephen's spirit, was to be at that concert. And I literally pulled into a parking lot and I'm on my phone on Ticketmaster and I'm going to buy the closest tickets I can get. I don't care what they cost. It's the advantage of being my age and good credit cards. And I bought the last 3 tickets that were very close. And I'm like, I don't know who I'm taking, but I got 3 tickets. And I had already mastered an idea of I'm going to make a banner and we're going to do a full-on Stephen thing where we were going to sneak that banner in because Stephen never followed rules. So we're going to pull a Stephen off to get this banner in. I sent the banner to a girlfriend of mine that does banners. She had it drop shipped back to me and we were just counting down the days to the concert. And I had asked Amanda, the caretaker, who'd been through hell and back with him. And then I asked Nina. And I took the 2 of those girls with me. And I had folded that banner up. And I had stuck it down the back of my pants. And I had a jacket on. So I was able to get through security. No questions. We didn't have purses. We just walked right in. And we were sitting on the 4th row, dead center of the stage. And I was a nervous wreck. My anxiety was through the roof. And I had pulled that banner out and set it on my chair. And I had begun to talk to 5 or 6 people directly behind me and tell them, I'm so sorry, but I have a banner. I won't hold it up through this whole concert. I promise you, I'm not going to block your view. I said, but if I show you this banner, you'll understand why. And so we showed it to him and they all hugged me and they said, we'll help you hold your banner. We'll make sure he sees you're here. And I said, okay, I just want to make sure that you weren't mad at me for blocking your view because I promise you I won't do it the whole concert. There's just a short period of time I want him to see it. They said, we got you. And the people in front of me, everybody within probably 10 to 15 people in the circle around me knew I was there for a reason that night.
Everybody there knew.
And Nina, we had a couple little smaller signs because we were smart. Because if they came to take my big sign, we still had more signs. You weren't taking all my signs. And I knew leading up to that concert, I cannot tell you how I knew it. I knew I was going to have an encounter with Jelly Roll. I knew it. I wasn't even worried about it. I was calm. It was going to happen. And the banner was pretty good size. It was probably the length of 3 of us standing together. And we didn't pull it out. All the opening acts went and did their thing. He came out on stage. We didn't pull it out. It was when he stopped and started to engage with the public, started talking, that we knew now was the time to pull the banner out. And it was when he was talking about what he does for the marginalized community. And he literally was walking by talking and he seen our banner and he moved his mic out of his mouth and he says, I got you. I got you. And then he went back to talking. And we all knew it was going to be okay. And we didn't keep the banner up. We just we dropped it back down. And then he came back around. You see, he looked for us again because he was getting ready to start a song. And we knew then, okay, lift it again because he's looking for the banner. And we held the banner high. And then that's when he addressed us. He goes, I have a mother up here who's holding a banner that says fentanyl stole my son 41 days ago. Ma'am, I'm here for you. I'm here for your song. I'm here for your son. And I have video of people behind me videoing me. And I'm not very proud of my behavior because I was extremely emotional in that moment. I was very emotional. And there was a connection in that arena that when he asked for the banner to be taken to him, and I walked that banner up there and I handed it off to his stage people, and I stood there at the edge of that arena or at the stage. And when he held the banner up and he didn't say a word, the music was just playing in the background, and he was letting the audience read the banner. And that was part of the reason why I made a large banner, so people could see it. And there was this collective audience making this noise, a combination of clapping and a noise of, there's just this noise of, we got you, Mom. There was this collective community that put me in their arms in that moment. And I felt it. I felt it. And it was the first time I ever felt like I was heard and understood. And that was probably the beginning of what I knew I had to do.
I'm sure in that moment, a lot of weight was lifted. You had been carrying everybody, everything, everyone, all a long time. And for Salena to have Salena, I mean, I'm sure you feel guilty about doing that. I mean, that's how this goes.
Yeah. There's one video that I put out that said, we got Stephen on the stage tonight at Jelly Roll. And there was a moment of, he'd be really mad right now. He'd be so mad that I made such a spectacle. But he would also be going, that's my mom. That's what my mom does.
As a person, so, and I didn't know that was you at the time, and I didn't know it was Stephen that was being spoke of at the concert, but as a person that just happened to be in the audience at the same concert, that experience moved every single person in that building. Every single person. And it was like a collective energy. You could feel love. I mean, you could feel
that's what I'm saying. I
love.
can't describe what that noise was, but it wasn't just people clapping.
No.
It was a noise of, I got you, Mom.
It's like a big hug.
Yeah, it was a hug. It was a verbal hug that came from everybody. I had people that were all down there in that area in front of the stage that all came and put their arms around me as we were singing. I don't know where Nina and Amanda were. I don't even know. I lost them because I had walked away from them to go up to the stage. Amanda took a lot of video for us, but there was, it was a very moving moment. And I don't know if that happens at every one of his concerts, and it's great if it does, but I believe that it made such an impact that literally maybe 8 to 10 people that I've never met before have contacted me from that concert, that have found me through that experience.
Well, and it sheds light on the reality of a dark situation, and that's just in one community here in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And this is the fentanyl is a problem that's happening everywhere. And it's way more rampant than anybody wants to acknowledge. It's literally in everything. It doesn't just affect the people that are using it, it affects the families. What would you tell families today that are in similar situations?
I'm so glad to see a shift that comes away from tough love. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand. Tough love and boundaries are two different things. But tough love is filling our funeral homes and our graveyards. And it alienates those families of having closure in the event that they lose their loved one. But it also makes that loved one who's struggling feel less worthy of recovery when somebody tells them they're not worthy of their love based on if they're using or not. I loved my son regardless if he was using or not. I loved him. So I highly encourage family members to meet their children where they're at. And don't worry about the judgment of other people. Don't worry about it. What are you doing today that makes it okay? I had a woman in recovery when Stephen was in the early stages when he first came home from prison. Emily was her name. And she said to me one day, because I was describing to her, you don't understand. My heart is wired to love my child. I can't do this tough love nonsense. It's biology. It's not a chemistry, it's biology. And she says, do what you can live with. If you can live with that, then do it. And it was the first time I had a moment where I went, oh, I can make my mind up how I want to handle this. But there was issues of people still telling moms and dads, you're the problem, you're enabling them. Tough love, toughen up, quit doing this, You need to look at those people and tell them, are you invested in what I'm doing with my child? Do you answer that 1 a.m. phone call? Are you helping my child in any way at all? Because if you have no investment in my child, you don't get to tell me how to manage the addiction that we're dealing with.
Well, it's a family disease.
It's a family disease.
And I'm sure it affected Stephen's brother.
Absolutely.
It affected him differently than it's affected you. Yeah. It's affected Nina differently than it has affected you.
We're all in therapy. I was in therapy even prior to this, but we are all in therapy. We've all been hurt and traumatized. And at the same time, we are all connected by it too. And how do we survive that? Well, you can't survive it without understanding what we dealt with, what we need to do differently. How do we in a healthy way, how do we process our feelings through this? Because if you don't, it manifests into the next generation. And there's still no guarantees that it won't.
Absolutely.
But we're going to try to work really hard on ourselves.
That's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I share that with everybody. I share that so other moms and dads and siblings and families understand they are not alone. They didn't suffer this with I wish I could say that there's a miracle out there. There isn't.
There's not a magical formula. There isn't a basket of let's do these things and it's going to make you better.
Everybody's path of recovery is different, and so is every family's process to understanding that.
For sure.
Is different. And one method doesn't fix everything.
No, not at all. If you could speak directly to the providers that closed their doors, turned Stephen away, turned you away, have turned guaranteed other individuals away, what would you tell those folks today?
I would first say I was a very loud advocate for Stephen. I made them all uncomfortable because I made them answer. And I did the follow-up calls. And I put them all on notice. And if I couldn't get the services, who the hell are we giving services to? If I am the loud voice screaming for help and you're ignoring me, who are you really helping? That's my first question I'd have to ask them. And then my next question would ask is, could you sit in my shoes and feel any differently than I do? And if you had to sit in my shoes, tell me what you're going to do differently.
Stephen was fortunate to have a mom that's willing to speak up in his active addiction and in his death. You're still speaking up, and you're speaking up for people that may not have a mom or someone in their corner, because a lot of people don't have a cheerleader that's going to show up even when it's hard. So I'll tell you, as a person that didn't have somebody like you, thank you.
You're welcome. I know that there's family members that gave up on their loved ones. I know that. I know that that's their coping for it. That's their own coping mechanism. I also know that I've sat in on family groups, in mixed groups of people who are in recovery and family members. And anytime I speak in those environments, usually there's one or two that'll share that they still struggle with their parent, or their parent didn't show up for them or whatever. I don't ever speak without first acknowledging the people like that in the room, because I want them to know they were worthy of love, even if they didn't receive it.
I think a stigma that comes with addiction is the lack of love, and I don't think that's it at all. Addicts are worth loving. We're people, we're all humans. Just make bad choices. Does it make us less worthy of wanting
No,
to get right?
no, not at all.
I'm glad we did this.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience today? What's coming next for Salena?
So I'm still advocating for family programs. I went to the state of Missouri and got my credentialing so that I have the proper credentials to come into those rooms and talk. My family support provider certificate and an MRSS through the credentialing. Those were important for me to have, because I can't just sit up here and talk from just lived experience. I needed to have the credentialing so that I had the ears of the people in those rooms. And going forward, I'm continuing to do the same work I'm doing. I'm still doing any speaking engagements. I got a couple of them coming up in December. I'm still hosting the podcast. And I did return back to work full time, so that really spreads me thinner than I would like to be. But responsibility of paying bills had to come in. And, continuing to advocate and speak on social media for other members, other families, or particularly mothers. It seems, that's my audience. I still receive a lot of communication daily from different mothers throughout the U.S. that are, I need help, or I've recently lost my child to this, and my community, didn't show up for me. No, nobody gets casseroles when your child dies of an opiate overdose. Families don't show up to support them, and the community doesn't show up for them. And that's sad, because that family didn't ask for that, but they had to endure it. So moving forward, I still want to be the voice that talks about that and destigmatizes that, and continue with my podcast. So tell me, how did you like sitting on that side of it?
I like it.
Yeah. So now I need you to come work with me and do some things with me.
I think I can do that.
Okay. I like that.
I'd like that. I'd feel honored.
I think we need to talk about it.
I agree.
Okay, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. Well, I am so blessed that I got this opportunity to sit down with you and gave you the space to tell a story I feel like you've been holding on to.
Yeah.
And took you a minute to get to the place that you are today.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing what's going to be next for us. So
Sure.
Thanks for everybody tuning in. And
yeah, absolutely. You guys want to see more podcasts from Beyond the Storm with Salena? Anywhere you can get a podcast. I usually send everybody to YouTube, but you can contact me through my social media. Miss Sassy on TikTok and Salena Garten on Facebook. Do you have social media that you can be contacted?
Yes, my social media, you can find me on Facebook under Sarah Fritz. It's under my maiden name.
All right. You guys, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And this is actually, I think, going to be our last episode for the season. So this was the season finale. And starting in January, we'll start season 2. Maybe we can get Sarah come out here and join us and doing some co-hosting on the next season as well. Okay, guys, thank you for joining.